All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another day of SaberSim's DFS office hours. Today is Thursday, February 5th of 2026. Looking ahead here, we had some sports get underway already. We had some League of Legends action earlier this morning. We had some tennis, and we had golf tee off. So good luck to all of you playing those slates for the rest of the day. We have a 7-game NHL main slate and then a 6-game NBA main slate, and the NBA trade deadline is officially over. So should be a fun day of DFS. For those of you who are new here, welcome. My name is Andrew, one of the coaches over here at SaberSim. This is a show where we go over how to use the SaberSim app, answer any and all DFS related questions, get your questions in one of three ways here. First off, send us an email, support@sabersim.com. Second, post it live in the YouTube chat. Third way, post it in the office hours channel in our Discord server. If you're not in our Discord and want to get access to that channel, there is a link in the description of this video. You also get access to our similar channels, individual sport channels, and you get access to the rest of the SaberSim team. Just can't say enough good things about the Discord. But with that said, we do this show Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern, and then we do this show on Saturdays at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. You can tune in any one of those days to get your questions answered. All right. As a reminder, this will be our last show of the week. We will not have our normally scheduled Friday and Saturday shows. I will be taking a couple of days off, so no show in the meantime, but we will be back next week. Have plenty of questions to get to today, which is great. Want to knock out all these questions and get back to people before the break here. So we are going to start working our way down here. And the first question of the day. Hey, Andrew, quick question regarding sim data. I know SaberSim does its analytics based on more of a lineup level, but is there a way to determine ROI/EV on a player level? Is one preferred over the other? Okay, good question. So as far as I know, we do everything at the lineup level. And, you know, the simplest example, right, is that you could have a 2-person lineup. One player gets 100 points and the other player gets 10 points versus a lineup where both players get 60 points. And in the first lineup, that's 110 combined. In the second lineup, that is 120 total. So like in that example, the second lineup wins, right? So it is really important to understand, on a lineup level, how things work. I think that, there are obviously going to be players that you see often. And you could see this like in SaberSim if you were to run a build and you sort by ROI, the top exposed players are the ones driving up the ROI. But as far as like an ROI calculation for them, that's at least not something we do or focus on at this time. So we try and focus everything at the lineup level. All right, next question. Hi, Andrew. I always cap my exposures at 80% to be able to control exposures. Is that a bad idea? Should I be running 100% then cap post build? Not sure if this is a good idea or if I'm hurting myself. Thanks as always. Okay. So what I would say here, first of all, is this is partially a question of risk tolerance, right? If you have a player who is rostered at 90% and they do bad and it bothers you so much, right? Well, probably the right answer is to cap them lower, So it's not to say like having a global max exposure at 80% is a bad thing. That's not true. It is the right thing for you. It might be the wrong thing for someone else, right? It might be the wrong thing for me. That's okay. We all kind of come at DFS from a different angle, in terms of like finance, like, hey, our portfolios are more leveraged, right? We like more risk. We don't like more risk. We like moderate risk. We like low risk, right? Everybody's different in that regard. So if capping at 80% makes you feel better about your lineups, great. Continue to do so. That is totally okay. The way you would do that for other people who might want to try it out, go to the max exposure column, click the gear icon, change this number from 100 to 80, click save. It will set an 80% max exposure to all players at once. So that's how you do that. I think it is okay. If it is something you know you want, it is better to tell SaberSim before building your lineup. So on the part about, hey, should I run it and then do it post-build? I would say no. I would say that if this is something you know you want, tell us up front. It will help us to build a pool of lineups that you are more comfortable with, and then apply these adjustments right away. All right, next question. Can you discuss custom ownership and how it interacts with the Sims? Yes, absolutely. Okay, so the first part is to understand how these Sims work, right? So there's two Sims. There are game Sims, and then there are contest Sims. Game Sims are what we use to create the projections, the team totals, and the game Sims are what we are using to build your lineups. So right now, when we're building lineups, we are effectively randomly sampling the game Sims, building the best lineups based on how those game Sims play out, okay? So game Sims are running right now, and it is building our lineup. So we don't need that many lineups. I'm going to cancel this here. 200 plus is plenty of lineups. Okay, so we get into the pool, right? And I'm going to go and turn on a contest sim. All right, I turn on a sim. I go back to my build. When you upload an entry file and you're on Ultimate, we will auto-enable the contest sims for the contests that you are playing. You don't have to go manually do it. So now I have my 271 lineups. So let's talk about what happens when I click Run Contest Sim. Well, what happens is my lineups go into a theoretical contest behind the scenes. The amount of my lineups that go into that contest sim depends on how many lineups I'm playing in said contest. So I have 271 lineups in my pool. Well, in this example, I have 11 entries in this contest. So 11 lineups at a time are going into a contest of this size, the 375. Now, where is the 375 coming from? Obviously, it's my 11. And it's a random 11 from the 271. But where are the other lineups coming from? The other lineups are coming from the field lineups. This is effectively our best guess at what we think the lineups in your contest are going to look like. Okay. Now, in this bucket, this high stakes bucket, there are 1,875 lineups. Okay. These lineups are static. These lineups get rebuilt when ownership runs. Okay. We will take the other 364 lineups from this 1875 to create a final contest of 375 lineups. And we will play that out, and we will figure out which lineups do good based on the sims. So we take one game sim of each game on the slate. So we create a slate simulation. We play it out. We assign actual fantasy points. The lineups get ranked in the standings, and then ROIs get assigned to each lineup. Okay. That's how the contest sim works. So the question here was about custom ownership. All right. So the way that custom ownership interacts, and I missed one piece, the field lineups, okay, are lineups like a build, right? The exposures from the field lineups become the ownership projections. So here, I think it was high stakes 20 max. So in that 1875 lineups, well, Jalen Johnson is 34% exposed in those lineups. His exposure in that set of lineups is 34%. That becomes the ownership projection, okay? Now, here's the custom part. Well, let's say that I think Jalen Johnson is going to be higher owned. Let's say I think he's going to be 50% owned. All right. If I come in here and I change his ownership to 50, okay, this alone does not change his exposure in the field lineups, because that set of field lineups is static, okay? That high stakes 20 max, those are the lineups, right? So if I actually want his exposure in the field to be different, well, first I would make all the changes I want. Now this can be uploading custom ownership completely, an entire set. This can be making a couple of changes, right? Maybe I don't really think Jaden Ivey's going to be 100% owned. Maybe I think he's going to be 75% owned, right? And maybe I think, 94% is too much for Buzelis. Maybe I think it's going to be 80%, right? And I make all the changes I want. Well, once I make those changes, I would go to the gear icon in the My Own column, remove the question. I would click Generate Field from Ownership. And I'm going to name it. I'm just going to say test. Now what we're doing is we are taking your inputs and we are creating a new field with your adjustments taken into account. Like, hey, okay, they think Buzelis is going to be lower. They think Jaden Ivey is going to be lower. They think Jalen Johnson is going to be higher. The builder is going to try and create a new field with those inputs while still maintaining a strong base as far as like understanding all the stat combos and player combos and salaries and projections and all of those things. But the key part is that it's taking your adjustments into account. Okay. And here, right, we see that. Hey, great news. Buzelis is 76%. Ivy is 70%, right? These players were both 95. So it's obviously working, right? Jalen Johnson came up from 34 to 45. So all our adjustments are taken into account. What last thing I need to do is I need to go back to the contest tab. And then I need to change the field because the high stakes 20 max field is still the high stakes 20 max field. It hasn't changed. We need to change this. Go down to field lineups and click test, right? My custom one that I named test. I want to sim against that one, so I need to change it here. That is how you either one, make ownership changes that impact the sims, or two, create upload a custom set of ownership, create a field that you can sim against. You have to do that piece of changing the field. Now, if you don't do that piece, right? What happens if you don't do that piece? Well, your adjustments, they don't get taken into account in the contest sim. These values will still matter a couple of places. Number one, they will matter if you do any filters. Say that again. They will matter if you do any filters to the player pool. They will matter if you use any rules. So basically the filters, the rules, and then the last one is the pool filters. They are all referencing the My Own column and the values in the My Own column. So the My Own column is the primary source for filters and rules. So that is a breakdown of custom ownership sims and how they interact. All right, next question. Single entry hand building NBA. That is our topic here. How do you select which games or individual teams you want to target on a slate? Are you targeting close games that could go into OT, or are you targeting games projected for a blowout? After you have chosen your team pool selected, how do you choose which players to put in lineups? Are you picking the pay up studs, hoping they hit their ceiling before they get benched? Are you playing blowout-proof players, playing correlated studs and scrubs from games projected to be close and hoping it stays competitive, maybe even OT? Okay, good question here. So I think one thing I've learned is that no game is blowout-proof. And it's impossible to know when a game is going to go to overtime or not. These are just things that you can't control. Like, I think the other day, Miami was playing Chicago. It was like a 3-point spread, and Miami won by like 40, right? It was probably one of the closest games projected on the slate, and it was a complete blowout, right? We see weird things where OKC is favored by 16 points and they lose to the Pacers. That is like the nature of sports. So I think it's really hard to account for all of that. What I would say is that, if you're doing a single entry, and you don't even have to fully be like hand building it, but you can be involved in the process in SaberSim a lot more like hands-on. That is what I would be trying to do. I wouldn't be trying to like fully do a hand build. I would be trying to like be more particular about the way that I construct the lineup. So for instance, right, let's say that, okay, I'm looking at the slate. I see a lot of big spreads. And then I see like one game with a close spread, right? Like I'm looking, okay, 10 points, Brooklyn, Orlando, 15 points, Washington, Detroit, about almost 10 points, Utah, Atlanta, almost 10 points, Dallas, Spurs. The only one like within 5 points really is Charlotte and the Rockets, right? So maybe I want to, for whatever reason, right, I want to play a player from this game, a high-priced player, right? I think, hey, the game's going to be close. The game's going to be back and forth. This is the narrative that I'm creating, right? After you do that, it's about figuring out the best way to apply the narrative in SaberSim where you still let SaberSim do what it does best, but you guide it in the direction you want it to go, right? So like what I would do here is I might set up a rule and I would say use at least one group by manual, click edit players, filter for Charlotte and Houston, and then I would pick maybe the top couple projected players, right? Okay, I'm going to choose Durant, Sengun, LaMelo, Amen Thompson, Brandon Miller, maybe Tari Eason, Napel, and Bridges, right? And maybe I stop there. Maybe I stop like players, projected over 30, or maybe I even get rid of Bridges, right? Okay, what I'm saying is, hey, I think this game's going to be back and forth. I want to play at least one. I'm going to call him a stud, right, from this game. I don't think this rule is too aggressive. I think it's saying use 1 out of 7 players. I don't think that's that bad, right? And you're building a single entry, So, in your single entry, you want one stud from this game. That gives SaberSim a ton of flexibility because it has 7 players to choose from. And then it's still in charge of the other nine slots, right? You could, okay, I set this rule. Great. Well, maybe I set a second rule, and maybe I don't want to play more than 3 players from one team or something like that, right? Okay, I go in, I say use no more. I do group auto, use no more than 3, group by team, click save. I'm setting up some rules, but I'm not being hyper aggressive with them. All I've told SaberSim is I want to use 1 out of 7 players. I want to use less than 3 players from one team, right? What I think you should do then is I think you should run your build. I think you should look at the top 10, 20 lineups. And here I'm just going to use SaberScore. Like let's say, I need one lineup, right? Okay, I'm going to look at just like the top regular SaberScore lineups. And I'm going to view them in expanded. And I'm going to view a couple lineups at a time. And I'm going to scroll here and I'm going to try and find a lineup I like. Right? Okay. I'm looking. And for whatever reason, this 6th lineup, I like it, right? Hey, Cooper Flag has been like super good lately. Not only do I get some of this value from Chicago, but I also pay up for Wemby. I pay up for Cooper Flag, and I really like the way this lineup looks, right? I've added my flavor into it. I've done things I want to do, and then I let SaberSim do the rest, right? I think that is the right approach to basically I'm going to call it hand crafting a single entry lineup, right? Now, I'm not personally building it, but I'm having a lot of input into what this lineup ultimately is going to end up looking like. So that is the approach that I would be taking when trying to handcraft a lineup. All right, next question. Hi, Andrew. If I am building a separate group of lineups for cash games, what settings should I use to generate the top projected lineups for all of my cash contests? I assume I don't want to use portfolio build, correct? Should I use unique one? Thanks. Okay, good question. So I have a video showing exactly how to do this, and I am going to show you where you can find that video. And we are going to bring up the Discord. So in the office hours channel, in the pinned messages, you can find this video, how to build the cash optimal lineup. We'll walk through it here, obviously, but as a resource, this is available to check out at any time in the Discord in case you ever need a refresher, or you just want to make sure you're doing things right. So I will link this to you, and then we will walk through it. All right, got that sent. Great. Okay, so how would I build for cash? Well, first thing, right, open a new build. One build for GPPs, one build for cash. Pretty good option there. Now, once this build loads, go to the settings in the projection section. Change build mode from sim to optimizer. Now, I would only build the amount of lineups you need. If you need one, well, I think it's okay to build like 20. I think 20 is like a pretty normal request here. Okay, I'm going to request 20 lineups. I'm going to make 2 adjustments. I prefer to make them in the my own column. And then I'm going to click run optimizer mode. All right. Optimizer mode is going to create your highest projected lineup first, second highest projected, third highest, fourth highest, etc. So lineups are running right now. And we'll stop it at 10. I think 10 is fine for our example here. But yeah, it runs a little bit slower, doing a very math-intensive process there. Now, after this loads, I would not leave it on portfolio. I would change it from diversity portfolio to diversity uniques one. And then I would change the rank by from ROI to to projected score. And then now essentially the top lineup is my cash optimal. And then I could see what some of the differences are, right? Like, hey, this lineup's 0.2 points lower. Well, I'd really much rather play, Nickeil Alexander-Walker over Jalen Suggs or something like that, right? So you can kind of like, okay, hey, this lineup's a 2v2, right? This lineup is Walker and LaMelo versus Suggs and Flag. Which 2-player combo do I like more? Because literally everyone else is the same, right? So it gives you opportunities to kind of make some decisions where I think it's okay basically to play like either one of these depending on how you feel. So that is how I would build the cash optimal. All right. Good stuff. Good stuff. Keeping it going. Next question. Hey, Andrew, can you recommend how you approach your contest entry strategy for large versus small slates to be as efficient as possible long-term, maximizing opportunity to win, with minimal bankroll drawdown. Although being conservative on large slates will reduce the amount you risk per contest, seems more likely to lose long-term by not going as max as possible and may actually result in a larger drawdown over the long haul. Please assume that ROI versus risk is paramount and that bankroll size is not an issue. Okay, so the way I think about this, well, first off, the way I enter contests is, and I've talked about this before, I do this like literally every day. Number one, if I am playing a slate or I'm playing a sport, I will always play the alternate slates. And I'll do it by style, okay? So if I'm playing NBA tonight, I won't play the single games, but I will play all of the classics, right? I will play the main, both turbos, and the night slate. The reason for this is that it spreads out your action and basically helps you to smooth out variance. Because let's say that you don't play, I don't know, Paolo Banchero, right? You know what? You're generally low on him. You have half the field. SaberSim didn't really like him. He didn't really get to Banchero. But let's say Banchero has a huge game, right? Just absolutely, like he goes like Luka the other day, like triple-double in the first half, just like absolutely nuts. You know, if you don't have him, you're probably not winning, right? Well, hate to say it, most of your main slate lineups are burned, right? But guess what? Banchero is not on the 4:30 Pacific Turbo. He's not on the 5 p.m. Turbo. He's not on the night slate. So there are, multiple other slates you can play that this player has no impact on. And that, in my opinion, is really what helps to smooth out your results over time. I'm a huge proponent of playing all the slates. I do it for NFL, play the early, the afternoon turbo, the Sunday night to Monday night, the Monday to Thursday, all of those smaller slates are great. I think think about it in terms of number of games on the slate, right? It's I don't really prioritize the Thursday to Monday because that literally has all the games. That's not the idea. The idea is these smaller bite-sized slates and playing just a small amount of bankroll on each. Now, when it comes to contest selection, I will follow the recommendations of, hey, play high effective entrance, play contests less than $3, play contests that the top prize is, greater than or equal to your daily wager, let's say $300. And I would start with these, right? And then I would apply this across all of those slates. Generally, don't get as much action down on the turbos and the nights. And that's okay, right? It's okay if, your action is spread out. So me, I've been playing a lot of FanDuel. I would play all three of these. I would get the least amount of money down on the Express. The next one would be after hours, probably 2 to 3 times as much down on the Express as that one. So let's say $50, $150 on the after hours, and then I don't know, $300 on the main, right? Something like that. Now, as far as picking the contest within these, I would do what I was talking about, high effective entrance, low dollars, kind of working my way up. But then I would also look at, well, what does 10th place pay, right? If we get into the top 0.01% of the contest, the payouts between 10th and first are obviously big, right? Okay, here, 10th is 100, first is 1,000, right? Okay, I would probably enter $100 worth of entries in this contest if I could. If the max is less than that, great, I'll max it out. That's generally how I'm picking my contests. I think it's important to know what your bankroll is for the day. Hey, how much am I playing today? And then start from there and then start entering your contests. And just be mindful of how much you're entering on each slate and try and spread that action out. That is what I think is the best. All right. Next question. How are you doing today? I'm doing great. I've been doing my NBA late swap with build 1 with my adjusted projections and min exposures. Not default late swap settings. And I have a standard sub. Am I approaching late swap wrong? I've had some success, but not consistent success. Thanks. Okay. So I don't think you're doing anything wrong. I think that if you have made changes in your build 1 and you go to late swap, well, for me, I think it is very normal to want to take those changes and use them in your late swap too. So if you're carrying over your settings from your build 1 pre-slate to your late swap build, totally fine, right? Totally okay. I do that too. You know, if I've made changes, hey, I want to take those with me, right? Keep them going. So I think carrying over your settings is normal. To be honest, I think that, you know, I don't think there is such a thing as consistent success in DFS. It literally doesn't exist. If you're not winning, you're probably on a downswing. Like breaking even is not something very common in the DFS space, just based off the way the game is structured. So like these are like simulation, these are bankroll simulations from like a project we did, right? Well, notice that like at almost no time is the line going just like straight across. This blue line is supposed to be 0. Either you are going like straight up and winning, or you are on this like slow decline down. You know, it is super, super hard. And you could probably do it for like a small period of time where you go kind of straight across. But at some point, you either got to be going up or you're going to be going down. And notice that like the down slopes are long, but they're not as steep, right? It's kind of like a slow decline. But then when the winds come, the winds are like, you shoot right up. You know, you shoot straight up here. So that is more due to the payout structures, right? These high percent to first contests and these payout structures where when you get in the 20th percentile, which is 1 out of 5 chance, you get paid 1.5 extra money. You get paid maybe 2 extra money. And so like min cashing is just a very bad thing in general. Like it's like if you're playing roulette at the casino, it's 35 to 1. Well, they decided, hey, we're going to pay you out, 15 to 1 instead. Like I don't think a lot of people would play because it probably wouldn't last very long. With DFS, though, the difference is, well, when you win a huge sum. It's like if you hit, okay, on the roulette table, well, when you hit number 3, you get paid 300 to 1 instead of 15 to 1, right? And that's like the difference there is that in DFS, when you get to the top, the payouts multiply exponentially, and it's not like a linear progression there. So keep that in mind. Eric said, did you turn your hat around and ship yesterday? I didn't. If I ship, I will turn my hat forward, and that will be your indication that I shipped. All right, next question. Peter said, hold on, I got rid of that. Okay, cool. Peter said, I'm interested in the ROI information listed post-slate. It kind of feels like it always just shows me negative ROI. And I guess because I just always avoid, I just about always avoid chalk, which I guess means that the ROI measurement is just measuring the program's perceived ROI based on the SaberSim projections. And to clarify, I don't mean I am limiting exposure to chalk. What I am doing is adjusting the chalk's player projections. Okay. So let's talk about post-contest sims, which is what this question is asking about. All right. So we go back to yesterday, go to the main slate. All right, so we go to the contest tab, and we're going to pick a contest. Let's pick the flagship. All right, these results are loading. Okay, great. So I come into the users tab. Now I can see users sim ROI, right? This is a aggregate. This is an average sim ROI across all the lineups that they played. So let's say I look at 150 maxers and I want to look at some of the highest sim ROIers who are maxing out these contests, right? Okay, so what this sim ROI is saying is that when we look at all the entries that this user played, and we play this contest out using all of the actual lineups, right? We know what all of the lineups are. So we're going to use all of those. We're going to play this slate out 100,000 times, and then we're going to see how much each of these users' lineups won, and then we can figure out, did this user overall win or lose money, right? So if we were to play this slate out over and over and over again, well, Z Roth here ends up winning money, right? That's what the positive sim ROI is showing. Now, if you are showing a negative ROI, I think there are things that you can do to learn here, and you can use certain columns to figure out where you're kind of going wrong, right? And we're going to pick a user. So, okay. So here, right, some of the highest ROIs, there are definitely some outliers. I would say anything above like 30% is like pretty good, right? You don't always have to be at the top. I'd say like top 20, 25 is like pretty good. So like if I was up here in like the 30, 40 range, I'd be pretty happy with that. Okay. So let's say I'm not, right? Let's say I'm down here. Let's say I'm at 3%, right? I'm on this user who has a 3% sim ROI. Okay, well, like what is so different about my lineups that they are performing so much different than the users up at the top, right? Now, some of the main things I'm looking at are, okay, how much average salary am I using? Am I leaving too much salary on the table maybe? Okay, my average is 49.7, 49.8. Looks like a lot of the top users using something similar, 48, 49.8, 49.9, 49.7. Okay, so not really that. My average salary is 282, and I have 3 average dupes. Okay, so this is actually a good one to look at, right? Because when I come up here, yeah, these users have average dupes too, but notice there is a player who also has 3 average dupes. Well, their same average score is 286. This is effectively like the average projected score. So what I notice is that, well, one, I notice it's okay to have 3 average dupes. The difference here is that if I have 3 average dupes, my sim average score needs to be much higher. It needs to be about 4 points higher, actually, based on what I'm seeing here. Now, there's flip sides to this. Okay, well, what if I play the same sim average score, but I have lower dupes, right? Well, hey, you could do that. You know, this user has 1 average dupe, and their sim average score is 278 about, right? So it's kind of a balance where if you're going to play higher dupe lineups, you need to have a higher sim average score. If you're going to play higher, or if you're going to play lower projected lineups, you can, but they need to be lower duped. So it's trying to find a balance between those two. Those would be like the primary things that I would be looking at to at least start with. Now, as far as your projection adjustments go, okay, so when you make projection adjustments in your build, right, in your actual build, your projection adjustments get accounted for in the ROIs of the pre-contest sim. So when we run your contest sim, we are taking your projection adjustments into account. Now, in the post-contest sim, we are not doing that. We are using the SaberSim baseline projections to analyze the lineups. So if you're using projections that are like drastically different than what SaberSim's projections are, then yes, you're going to grade out well in your sim, and then you're going to grade out poorly in the post-contest sim. What I would say here is that I just want to like, and maybe you know this, and that's okay. You know, not all chalk is bad chalk. right? I think that in 2026, players are better at identifying when there are teams or players or group of players who are in a good spot. And sometimes chalk is warranted, right? I think today is a perfect example of that with like Chicago. You know, we're going to go back to today's slate and we're going to talk about it. All right, let's let this load. Okay, so I'm just going to open a new build. All right, we go to Chicago and we look here, right? So Chicago has basically traded a bunch of players away, and a lot of the players that they have received are effectively not playing tonight. So Chicago is like very, very shorthanded. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They have 8 active players here. I think earlier in the day, they actually only had 7 active players. So this number of active players has actually gone up here. I think Colin Sexton was a late addition. But like these players have very high values and they have very high ownerships too, right? I don't think this is, you know, bad chalk, right? I think this is probably good chalk. And a lot of these salaries are really low. 4,100, 3,900, 4,300, 45, 36, 31, right? So I think that it's okay to adjust projections, but I don't think you should just adjust people for like the sake of adjusting them, essentially, you know? So just keep that in mind when you're making your adjustments. Understand the differences in the pre-contest sim and post-contest sim, but that's effectively how the ROIs are working. All right. Next question. Is SaberSim looking for someone to provide CS projections? I know Sam handles COD projections, but I don't know if SaberSim is planning to have someone do something similar for CS. Good question. The answer is I don't honestly know. That's a little outside of my scope. But if you're interested in making an offer to SaberSim like that, I think the best thing to do would be to send an email to support@sabersim.com, and then we can route it to the appropriate person who can answer that question. All right. Next question. Another question I have is the sim optimals column in the post build sorting. Many of them will just say 1 sim optimal or 0, but then in other builds, I sometimes see it as high as 10. What does this mean? Okay, good question. So what sim optimals is a metric that effectively counts when a lineup was the highest scoring lineup possible in a set of sims. So you're more likely to see a higher number of sim optimals on, say, showdown slates than you are on classic slates. And part of this is just because of the raw number of available combinations. Okay. So keep that in mind when you're looking at sim optimals. But as far as when you're going to see a higher number or not, yeah, higher numbers in classic in showdown, and then lower numbers in classic in an actual build. Okay. Go to the settings. When the sim diversity is 10, you will see a sim optimal statistic. When sim diversity is less than 10, you will not see it, because sim optimals requires us to run 1 simulation of each game on the slate. When we're in the post-contest sim, right, we're taking 1 sim of each game, playing it out to create a slate simulation. When we're on showdown and we're building on sim diversity 10, we're taking 1 sim of each game. Well, when we're on 9, we're not taking 1. We're taking more than 1. We're taking 5. We're taking 10. That number goes up as the sim diversity goes down. So you're not going to see sim optimals outside of post-contest and builds run on sim diversity 10. Just keep that in mind. All right. Follow up from an earlier topic. So custom projections affect lineup builds. Custom ownership affects field lineups if custom field is generated. Yes, so custom projections affect lineup builds. That's correct. Custom projections, like we were kind of just talking about, also impact the contest sims. So when you upload custom projections, you don't need to do anything extra to get the custom projections to impact your lineup building and your contest sims. The custom projections will automatically impact lineups and sims. When you upload custom ownership, it only impacts filters and rules, both lineup and player filters. It impacts sims if you create a custom field. That's correct. All right, next question. When projections are similar, which variables most often drive meaningful differences in ROI ranking in SaberSim, and how should I translate those variables into portfolio construction decisions when limited to min uniques? Okay, so as far as what variables most often drive differences in ROI, I think it's this is the way I look at it. Let's go back, shapes, line. Okay, let's go projection. Let's go ownership. Okay, it's like a simple example. So basically, you can find the same ROI lineup anywhere on this line. You can find a lineup. Let's assume lineup has 50% ROI. Well, the lineup can be low projected. It can be. Let's do this. You could have a lineup low projected. The fact is, though, that it has to be low owned as well. If you have a low projected lineup, but it's high owned, this lineup's going to be bad. This lineup is not going to grade out well. Similarly, you could have a high owned lineup, but it has to be high projected. Okay, fine. You want to play higher ownership? Okay, well, like this lineup has to project really, really well to outdo the ownership. And this is like that lineup that we saw that had the 3 average dupes. Whereas like, hey, you can play lineups that are duped, but it has to, effectively have this really high projection, which kind of correlates like to the win rate. The problem is that when you play the high owned lineup, but it's like lower projected, right? When you're like over here, it's like, hey, this lineup is high owned, but it's low projected, right? That's bad. So I think that, anywhere kind of on like this bottom section is like where you kind of want to like avoid. It seems like if you found a lineup that was like a low owned and high projected, is like the greatest lineup ever. And you would want to find more lineups like that. So that's like the way I think about it when in terms of like trying to figure out what kind of components drive ROI. All right. Next question. The thing about this question, okay, this is a follow-up. It looks like to the chalk one. The thing about this question that's just asked is that every slate is different based on who the chalk is, how good or bad the chalk is, how many games are on the slate. Every slate is different. Yeah, for sure. So I definitely agree with that in terms to like some slates are going to have more teams. Some slates are going to have more players out. Some slates are going to have more players traded, ownership levels are going to be higher or lower. So yeah, all of that definitely varies. It sounds like you have some type of process or kind of formula as to how you're handling that. It just seems to me like SaberSim has a different opinion of how it would handle it versus how you're handling it. I think if you're looking for like more feedback to this, our team does what we call build reviews, where somebody essentially says, hey, I'd like you to review my lineups from February 4th, DK, NBA main slate. And then one of our coaches will go in, look at your slate, look at your lineups, give you some like personalized feedback and advice about things that you did, things that we saw, things that we would recommend that you potentially try to do different, and kind of go from there. That might be really helpful here. Might be what you're actually looking for. So consider, if you're interested in that, send an email to support@sabersim.com and somebody can take it from there. All right, next question. Do you recommend a player pool size? I understand it's slate dependent, but how can I know with my builds if I'm stretching out too thin on a bunch of plays instead of a focused core? So I think it's okay to curate your player pool. I think that if that is something you want to do, I would use the filters here, right? That could be something like projected points. We've done some projected point examples where you just cut off players below a certain threshold. That could be a situation where maybe you do something based on a detailed stat. You come in here and you say, show lineups with players whose minutes are greater than X, right? Maybe I want to guarantee that, the players I'm playing are going to see a certain amount of minutes, right? That could be another thing that I look at. So I think that it's okay to curate your player pool. I don't have like a perfect number in mind of like, hey, you should, your player pool should be this many players. Like, we don't really kind of operate like that. Like you said, it would be slate dependent, but I think it's okay to set some filters. All right, next question. Last question. Should I really be aiming for top 1 to 2% within an entire portfolio with the reality that these are what actually win tournaments? I'm not sure I totally understand what you're referring to when you say, should I be aiming for top 1 to 2% within an entire portfolio? I'm not sure what the top 1 to 2% is per se here. So if you want to clarify, I'd be happy to circle back on this one. Looks like this is a build review request. If that is what you want, this is definitely the wrong place to request it. I would really send the email though, just, subject build review. Hey, can, you review my lineups? If you send it from the email related to your SaberSim account, that makes it incredibly easier for us to do. All right. Peter said, you're misunderstanding my question. I think I was talking about in the other tab. I was asking about why SaberSim is telling me I had a negative ROI even when I am winning big. My question was about how those calculations are determined. Okay, it looks like we ended up getting to the final root of the question here, where Peter said, yes, that is what I was talking about. Okay, cool. Warlock said, I binked the NBA minimax last night, but my sim ROI was negative. Well, first off, congratulations on the win. I think this is an important topic too. Even negative sim ROI lineups win contests some amount of the time, right? And it's important to kind of understand that. I think what the negative sim ROI is saying is that if you played this set of lineups in this contest over and over and over again, it would lose money over the long term. It doesn't mean you're not going to make money in the short term. So the other thing to keep in mind that I like to think about is I like to think about what is a contest's achievable ROI. And the way I figure that out is like, let's say we go back to yesterday again. All right. The easiest contest I know to check this out in is like the $2 mini max. We'll talk about why. All right, $2 150 max here. So I go to this contest. I go to users. I look at 150 maxers, sort by sim ROI. All right. In this contest, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 positive ROI 150 maxers in this contest. That is not a big number, okay? For reference, right, let's say we go to the large mini-max, the 50 cent, where this one has 60,000 entries as opposed to 5,000. And we're going to let this load. All right, so in this contest, there are many, many more than 7 users entering 150 lineups. I'm going to say that again. The achievable ROIs in this contest are much greater, okay? The reason really comes down, in my opinion, to the number of entrants in these contests. So like the 50 cent mini max has 396 effective entrants, where it takes 396 unique users all entering 150 lineups to max out the contest. The $2 mini max takes only 34 users. Well, even at the low stakes, there are good players who have access to these contests, and the less effective entrants, effectively the lower achievable sim ROIs. Okay. So the 50 cent mini max is going to be a easier contest to have a positive ROI in long term. Okay. Now getting back to the other part here with negative sim ROI lineups winning, right? Okay. Let's see who won this contest. I should have picked a smaller contest. Okay, this one's probably not the best example. We got to pick a smaller one. Let's go to the $2 mini max. And we're loading up the $2 mini max right now. Okay, this isn't the best example, but we can use this, I think. So let's look at this user who came in 4th in this contest, right? Negative 20% sim ROI, but they still have a win rate of 0.01, right? It's like what this means is that, hey, over the long term, yes, this user does lose overall, but they did win the contest some amount of the time, and they did cash at a certain percent of the time. So like if we did an easy example here, right? Let's say we're playing a $1 single entry, and there are 100 entrants in the contest. All right. So we're going to run a contest sim, and we're going to sim it 100,000 times. So 100K sim sample size. All right. So in order to find the ROI, we would need to do the money won divided by entry fees. Okay. So the entry fees here are going to be, and we're going to put a line here, $100,000. Okay. Entry fees are 100,000. The winnings are going to be as much money as the lineup won, right? So in the numerator, if we do say, okay, this lineup won $90,000 overall to Sims, right? It won some amount of the time. It cashed. It had some high finishes. But overall, it didn't exceed the entry fees. This lineup is a negative ROI lineup, even though it won some amount of the time. Where it would be positive is if this number was 110,000. Now this lineup would be showing a positive ROI. So the ROI doesn't indicate that the lineup can never win. It just means that if we played it again and again and again in this format, in this structure, SaberSim doesn't think it wins money over the long term, although it can win it in the short term. All right. All right. A lot of back and forth here. Don't be soy. I did answer the question about custom ownership earlier on the show. That question was up here. You can rewind and find it. I'll show you where we talked about it. Because I'm positive. I made a point to answer that or talk about that early. Okay, it was right here. Can you discuss custom ownership and how it interacts with the sim? So we did a segment on that, I think about like the 8-minute mark. If you scroll back, you can find that, but that one's in there. I can find it and send you a timestamp link to it after the show as well. All right. Okay, I think this is the next question here. Hey, for NFL Showdown, Super Bowl slate, I'm maxing a variety of contests, $3, 20 max, minimax, single entry, etc. I've been using one group per contest, portfolio diversity, and haven't had good results. I find myself changing lots of exposures. I know you have mentioned to switch to direct fill in this case, but do you think I am better off keeping one group per contest and changing only a couple exposures or switching to direct fill? Also, do you recommend toggling avoid duplicates on or off if I'm playing 200 plus entries? Last question. I've only been changing exposures for past showdown slates, trying to get the right exposures that I want. Do you recommend anything else to add/change to my process? Thank you. Okay. So there's about 3 questions here that I understood. So we are going to go through them one at a time. The first part was, I find myself changing lots of exposures. I know you have mentioned to switch to direct fill in this case, but do you think I am better off keeping one group per contest and changing only a couple exposures or switching to direct fill? Okay. So I think direct fill is the right answer for you. And I think it's because of this other statement you made where I'm trying to get the right exposures that I want, right? That is very, very, hyper specific to you, and that's okay. I think it's important to get the exposures that you want, because at the end of the day, what you want is you want to be able to say like, hey, I got the guys I wanted. It didn't work out. That's on me. I think a lot of people can, if they don't do that, right? Like, and your guys do good. Problem is, like, I knew I should have got to those guys. Why didn't I trust my gut? And you're upset by it, right? So I think that, for like sanity purposes, I think getting to the plays that you want matters. What I also think you should do is you should really track how those players do. Like just pull up an Excel sheet, and track it, or do it on a pen and paper. Like, it doesn't matter how you do it. The point is to say, like, okay, which players did I limit? And you could use something as simple as like, did they go over their projection or not? And then which players did I boost, right? So for the players that you set min exposures for, a win would be the player going over their projection. And then the players you set a cap to, a win would be them coming in under their projection, right? Like, that would make sense to me. And when the player that you set a minimum for does not go over their exposure, that's a loss. And then when the player you set a cap on goes over their projection, that's a loss, right? And be objective. And then you can track how you're doing and saying, hey, am I correct often enough where I should continue to do this? And if you're like break even, I think that if you're break even, then there's probably something better that you can find to do with that time to actually add value. If you're wrong a lot, then you should stop doing that. And then if you're right a lot, I would say like if you're correct 60 to 70% of the time or more, then I would absolutely continue to keep doing that. So I think you need to have a sense for how well you're doing and then adjust accordingly. Okay. Second question was, do you recommend toggling avoid duplicates on or off if I'm playing 200 plus entries? Okay. So my opinion on this one is that if you are on starter, then what I would do is I would leave avoid duplicates on. If you are on ultimate, I would turn avoid duplicates off. And the reason for that comes down to how the lineups are optimizing. On starter, you're using portfolio. Portfolio uses SaberScore. For all of your lineups, there is only one SaberScore. So all of the lineups are using the same baseline metric. So for that reason, I think having avoid duplicates across lineup groups on is correct. When you are using Portfolio Plus, which is on Ultimate, the Portfolio Plus calculation is using the ROI of each specific contest. Imagine that each ROI is effectively a completely different sorting metric. If I have one lineup and I have two contests and I run contest sims for both, the ROI is not going to be the same. The ROI is going to be different based on the payout structure, the number of entrants, the strength of the field. So every ROI is different. So because every ROI is different, I think it's okay to leave this off because you're not using the same metric at any point to analyze a given contest. So if you want to leave it on all the time, that is totally okay. I turn it off. I like it off. That's my preference, but it is okay to leave it on at all times. But I would definitely leave it on for starter is the point that I want to make. All right. The last part of this question was, do you recommend changing anything else to add to my process? Okay. So if you're not doing this, I would recommend doing this. So we were talking about showdown strategy here. Now, for showdowns, duplication is very important. If you're not accounting for duplication, I would start. Now, the way I would recommend starting is in the office hours channel, in the pinned messages. Go down to this video that discusses geometric mean. I'm going to pull this up a little bit. Okay. This geo mean tutorial, I'll link it here in the chat because this was a YouTube comment. I would start here. This will explain what geometric mean even is and to use it for showdowns. And I think this is a very useful tool for showdowns. So check this out. We'll walk through how to use it on both Ultimate and Starter and give you a better sense for why it matters. All right. Good stuff there. Okay. Peter said, it seems the ROI question has been solved. The answer is that if one deviates from SaberSim default projections, that it will always tell you that you have a negative sim ROI correct. So I would say wrong here. I do not think that's true. I think you can see this with like top players from other companies. And I think that this is always like a indication to me that like a player is a good DFS player, where when you see somebody who you're fairly certain is using a different set of projections and they are still grading out positive, that generally means that their lineups are strong. Okay. So like I'm going to go to like this contest from yesterday. I go to users. Now let's look at users who entered 10 or more entries, greater than or equal to 10. And we sort by sim ROI. Okay. Maybe we should have done the flagship. We're going to do the flagship instead. All right. And let's look at 150 maxers. Okay, so this is a good example. So the Colts is, I believe, Steve Buzzard from Stochastic. So the Colts here, right, is probably using stochastic projections, but he's still grading out well, even in our sims. 50% sim ROI. Like I think that's a phenomenal number. Good DFS player, like historically has won a lot of big tournaments and stuff. Like respect him for sure. The fact that he's grading out well, even in our sims, show me that like, hey, he's probably submitting good lineups. I don't think if you are very low, like 0% sim ROI, that you can just chalk it up and say like, hey, oh yeah, it's because, I'm using different projections or I'm making different decisions, right? I would say that if you were doing that, you can expect some deviation, yes, but I don't think you should expect that much deviation. Like I would say that if this was you at 0% and you were using SaberSim instead of your own, you might be like, I'm making up numbers, like 15, 20% sim ROI if you were using ours. But that doesn't mean that you're going to be like all the way at the top if you were using ours instead. So I think that the custom projections matter somewhat, but I think that there's still components of like lineup construction and things like that matter here. And, we do see users from other places still grading out well. I think that's a good indicator that their lineups are strong. All right. Don't be so. He said, grazie. You are welcome. All right. Check in office hours one more time. All right. Nice long show today. Great way to finish the week of office hours shows. Appreciate you guys tuning in. I will be back next week. No office hours Friday or Saturday of this week. Until we chat again, take care. Good luck. Thanks. Bye.